Welcome to Puzzling Minds Podcast. It's your host, Michael Maddox, holistic health and wellness coach and self-published author. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey and letting me be part of yours. And letting me be part of yours, I welcome you down the path of trauma, because that's what this episode's going to be about, just a little bit. For this episode, it's going to be a small one. It's going to be a little short. However, I hope you will enjoy it and gives you a little bit more of an in-depth idea of how generational trauma works. This episode, we will be discussing epigenetics. According to the National Institute of Health, epigenetics is the study of how cells control gene activity without changing the DNA sequence. Epigenetics changes are modifications to the DNA that regulate whether genes are turned off or on. Environmental influences such as a person's diet, pollutants, as well as experiencing any form of stress, aka trauma, can impact your epigenome and can be inherited further in generations. With trauma, it does pass on to further generations. For example, when a parent experiences a type of trauma which causes stress and wasn't able to work through the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system properly, and you don't know how to either heal, control, mitigate that reaction, it places that on your DNA. Therefore, when you have an offspring, it will directly be working with them as well in terms of, let's say your offspring experiences something similar or reacts in a way like, oh my gosh, I just get this pain or this chest feeling. Or for example, they've done a study when those who experience gas chambers during World War II, their offspring experienced similar body sensations as their ancestors. Their offspring will have difficulty working through the same or similar experience. Therefore, when two parents give their offspring that, it's important to not only discuss emotions in early childhood, letting your child know that it's okay to discuss your feelings, it's okay to work out how you're feeling emotionally. They need to discover how to put a label on it. And a really good method to use is the ruler method. So the ruler method is to indicate how your body is feeling, putting a name on it, and how does one control that sensation, that feeling, that negative response. That's what the ruler method is basically. You could go online and you could search up the acronyms. Don't know them on the top of my head because I don't really indicate the ruler method. I just know it exists. That's it for epigenetics. Like I said, it is a very short episode. I'm going to be discussing my third book, Trauma's Web. What I've enjoyed writing about this book is the process of it all. How does looking back at our generations influence the generations now, given the experience, given the resources and attitudes and values, and how that set us up now, in today, as well as tapping into the idea of generational trauma that you experience yourself, and how to heal from that trauma in terms of taking back your self-autonomy, your individuality, also how to take back your agency. I'm going to read a little bit on my third book. So I hope you all enjoy it because all enjoyed writing it. And I think I have read this earlier in some episodes, but for those who are just listening to this episode for the first time and wanting to understand a little bit about the idea of epigenetics and kind of tapping into, how did we set ourselves up in terms of generations? If I can find it. This book won't be published until sometime next year. I'm deciding if I want to do it beginning of the year, given my status. I've also been contemplating if I want to wait later on in the middle of the year. So this portion is in my third book, Trauma's Web. So keep a lookout on my website. I also have other publishings on there. One of my 3 memoirs and a poetry book. I will also be doing an episode in regards to each of those books. The first one will be about my poetry book, Substance, because I've enjoyed writing that the most. So this portion is called The Generations Game of Telephone. Perhaps you remember a game called Telephone, which you may have played when you were a kid. This game was held with a group of people sitting around a circle. The game started out with the first person choosing a word or phrase, and they would whisper it to the next, and so on until they got to the last person. Halfway through, that original word may have been altered in a way that it may sound similar from the original or completely different. The objective of the game is whether or not you can listen carefully to make the original word stay true. On the other hand, some may have the intention to purposely alter the original word or phrase to have the satisfaction to change the final outcome. Think of this analogy as to what generational trauma is exactly. You may be asking, how so? Well, let me explain. The first person, let's call them the silent generation. This generation was between the years 1928 to 1945, well known as the traditional generation due to their ways of living. The title was given its name due to being seen as bland and altered with their surroundings. As you may have seen, this generation was during the times of the Great Depression and World War II. Society at the time went from living a lavish, outgoing life full of abundance to hanging on a thread. Flora Davis states, silent generation are disciplined, hardworking, respectful, resilient, and cautious with money. And we're conformists. What I find interesting about this blog post is the word conformist. To conform is to alter yourself to meet a higher standard, and in this case, society at this time was conforming themselves as to what was expected by them. As a result of this becoming the norm, topics about mental health too became a silent generation in itself. It was deemed unacceptable to discuss this complex topic as fear lurked, holding a straitjacket and a ticket to a multitude of experiments for the next few decades. Oakes Integrated Care identifies this to be the case. Stiff upper lips and stoic attitudes were the norm. Seeking help for mental health challenges was a sign of weakness. Many of this generation still carry these beliefs, making it challenging to openly discuss mental health issues. In the book, The Silent Generation, 1925 to 1945 by Rob and Jen Henger, discusses social and economic issues this generation faced firsthand. This resulted in a reconfiguration of every individual's DNA due to the abundance of trauma being experienced, starting the ideology of intergenerational trauma. Throughout the coming generations, this was soon to become a cultural phenomenon conforming to being silent. The World Health Organization, WHO, makes it aware that adolescence is a crucial period for developing social and emotional habits important for mental well-being. Protective and supportive environments in the family, at school, and in wider communities are important. During this time of a child's life, they are the most vulnerable, as stated above. This happens to be showcased with their authorities, like parental figures and others that classify higher in society. A child's perspective of self can change as quickly as taking a breath. One negative cause could have the longest effect, which can leak into adulthood. After the wars, once families were able to start settling, birth rates increased, which created the new generation, baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. The social and cultural landscape of baby boomers was drastically changing, witnessing events like Vietnam and Korean War, as well as many civil rights movements. Growing up in these experiences, the boomers were characterized as one who values relationships, goal-centric, self-assured, and resourceful. This generation was much more open-minded than their parents. Notably, positive change in the education system may have been a factor on why this generation were fighters. Many boomers are influenced by the idea that mental health issues can be resolved through personal growth and self-help. While some embrace therapy and self-exploration, others remain skeptical of psychiatric medications. Think of life as a one-way street. This one-way road remains steady unless there is some external factor. This external impact causes a turnoff, which leads back to a different one-way route. This road may run smoothly, or it may contain potholes and slopes. This one-way road is your life, and various things impact the decisions you make, aka your routes. Culture is one of these factors that impacts your road. Generation X, 1965 to 1980, marked a turning point in that road in the adoption of societal beliefs. Another name for this generation is being a latchkey kid. Those born in this generation were recognized for achieving independence at a young age as their parents pursued the American dream. The children walked around with keys around their necks. Analyzing this, the theory of attachment plays a role in this generation, potentially influencing the psychological outcomes of future generations. As independence becomes the main characteristic of this generation based on the theory of attachment, they would most likely be avoided. Additionally, they also developed the mindset of tough it out. This worldview had a negative impact on future Generation Z. Still, mental health came to a standstill since society remained unsure about it. The upcoming generation would soon be a new century. This meant a significant transition in both social and cultural dimensions as well as technology. They remained carrying the same core values as the prior generation, only difference being the invention of the first computer. Gene Twenge states in their interview, millennials are more focused on themselves and less focused on things outside themselves. With the invention of computers, it was only a matter of time before social media followed. Nonetheless, millennials remain outwardly independent and easygoing. The end of the 20th century marked the beginning of the 21st, and with it, the introduction of a new generation known as Gen Z, who lived from 1997 to 2009. Some say it's also 1996, depending on who you talk to. This generation saw a start of a new century, which brought with it a completely different set of competing ideologies. They developed an early facility with powerful digital tools that allowed them to be self-reliant as well as collaborative, introducing new platforms like social media. Social media's versatility and adaptability allow people to travel the world without physically leaving their surroundings. Thus, society had adapted to internal self-shadowing as opposed to its previous culture of outward expression. This eventually led to a rise in the absence of communication, which is critical for development of general well-being, particularly in the formative years of a child. Speaking indirectly creates a barrier to clear communication. Major part of growing up in friendship requires a certain amount of risk-taking. It takes courage to be honest about your feelings and then hear what the other person has to say. Crucially, candid face-to-face interactions foster a general sense of empathy for one another. Beginning in adolescence, that is significant in and of itself. If not, one might experience psychological changes. Adolescence is a critical time for growth. It's acceptable for some people to be ahead of others. As we go, we pick up knowledge from people we look up to, our parents, instructors, mentors, and other adults. Referring back to the theory of trauma using my analogy of the game of telephone, these elements are crucial to being the telephone. Thank you all. I hope you all enjoyed that and look forward to my new book, Trauma's Web. Like I said, it will most likely be published no later than the middle of the year. I'm still deciding whether or not. All right, well, that is it for today's podcast on Puzzling Minds. Like I keep mentioning so forth, is check out my new rebranded website, nurturingrootscoaching.com, and schedule a new client consultation today. And I hope you all enjoy your fantastic week and weekend. We'll see ya!